Make sure you check out our online store where we work with our graphic designer to create stunning garment and product designs that feature a wide variety of aircraft types such as British fighters, World War II aircraft, American bombers, Russian fighters and much more. You can pick your favourite designs and personalise any items within our Redbubble store that range from clothing right the way through to stationery. All of our designs feature our logo so you can show your support for the channel while getting a quality product. You can head to our website aircrewinterview.tv and click store, or go to redbubble.com/people/AC interview. Thank you and enjoy. So Cabo, when did you first become interested in aviation?
I honestly can't remember a time where I didn't want to fly jets. It's funny. I mean, from my very earliest childhood memories, I've always wanted to fly airplanes. Nobody else in my family is into aviation, and very few, like one or two cousins here and there were in the military previously, but they did kind of one assignment and then left. So nobody really was like a career military person or aviator. And I honestly couldn't tell you what the first experience was that kind of was the catalyst for it. But like I said, I can't recall a time where I didn't want to fly jets.
So what year did you actually join the US Air Force?
I started in the Air Force in 2004, and that was by way of the Air Force Academy. So it's a four-year university, and you basically go there, but you're also doing military stuff for 4 years. It's like West Point or the Naval Academy, if you're familiar with those. But for the Air Force specifically, I was there for 4 years. I actually did an exchange for 6 months in Spain at the Spanish Air Force Academy, and then went
Wow,
back. So total of 4 years in school, and then from there went to pilot training.
brilliant. So can you talk us through some of the aircraft you started training on?
Absolutely. So the first airplane I flew in the Air Force was actually a glider, and I flew that for about 2.5 years at the Air Force Academy. They have a kind of a familiarization introductory flight program where you do 10 flights in the glider, and then the hopes are that you sold the glider out at the end of that program. And knowing that I'd always wanted to fly airplanes, it was kind of the path I wanted to pursue, and absolutely fell in love with it. Glider flying is incredible. And then the Air Force Academy is in Colorado Springs, Colorado, so you have this amazing backdrop of these mountains. With the gliders, it's very quiet. You just hear the wind noise. It's stunning, especially in the early morning and the late evening where you have those amazing colors in the sky with the mountain backdrop. It's incredible. So I started flying that. I did that for about 2.5 years. I was teaching, actually was an instructor pilot in the gliders for about 2 years. And then from there, I went on to fly the DA-20, which is kind of the introduction to powered flight airplane the Air Force uses. And that's just mostly just to ensure that people have the capacity to fly airplanes. So before they invest, millions of dollars in training you to become a pilot, they want to make sure that you have the basic, aptitude to fly airplanes, as well as the ability to learn and process things in the aviation kind of sphere. So flew that for about, I think, a month or 2 months, something like that. And then from there, went to pilot training, flew the T-6 Texan II, which is a single engine turboprop airplane. And then flew the T-38C Talon, and then from there flew the F-15C for about 4 years total, and then went to the F-22 back in 2014, and was in Alaska flying that for about 4.5 years, and now I'm here in Virginia with the F-22 demonstration team, and been loving it. I've been here for a little over 2 years now, and I mean this is the coolest job ever. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll get onto that in the interview. But yeah, did you have a type in mind when you were going through flying training that you wanted to be selected to go and fly?
My dream airplane from the time I can remember was the Eagle. I love the Eagle.
Yeah.
And when I was going through the course, the F-22s were very, very infrequent in terms of when they were available. So there weren't any available in my class, and that's okay. I got to fly the airplane that I always wanted to fly growing up. The F-15 is like, if you like cars, obviously in America, the 1970s muscle cars,
Yeah.
Dodge Charger, Dodge Challenger. Like I look at the Eagle like that, where it's it's got a manual gearbox. It's if you want to redline the RPMs, you can. You can do anything you want to with that airplane, and it's not going to stop you or limit you in any way. So I look at that airplane in that capacity, where it's just there's an emotional connection that I've always wanted to fly that airplane, and I'm so thankful I got a chance to fly that and learn from a lot of incredibly experienced Eagle drivers, and kind of learn the methodology of how to become a good fighter pilot, as well as having the opportunity to fly that airplane. That's obviously a historic airplane in terms of its success in air-to-air combat.
Absolutely. So can you talk us through some of your ground and flying training on the Eagle?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ground training started with academic and simulator flying in Oregon. So I basically went to an Air National Guard base, which your viewers may not be familiar with how the Air National Guard works into the greater context of the Air Force.
Hmm.
The Air National Guard is mostly just state funded. And it still has a combat mission as well, but it's kind of nuanced in terms of who pays for the budget, essentially,
Right.
and how they're funded and sourced. But I went to a guard squadron in Oregon and spent probably I think it was about a month worth of academics, maybe a month and a half worth of academics and simulators. And then you start off in a two-seat version of the F-15, the F-15D. So you have an instructor pilot in the back seat, and they, basically fly with you for the first couple of sorties. And then the rest of the program, you pretty much do all by yourself in a single seat F-15. And occasionally when when you're doing something brand new, something that's very high G, very complex, they'll put an instructor pilot in the backseat as like a safety observer, essentially,
Right.
to make sure you're not doing anything crazy, because it is dynamic and challenging. And but that's kind of the program for the F-15 and how that progressed. And it took about 6 months or so, 6 7 months to finish that course.
So our favourite subject on the channel and our viewers, they want to know about DACT. So how did the F-15 fare in DACT against, the types at the time?
Yeah, I mean, the Eagle is just an incredible air-to-air platform. So in terms of maneuverability, it's phenomenal. I'll go back to the cars example. So if you're flying the Eagle, it's got great big wings, very similar to Raptor in that way. Big wings, it flies very high altitude. So the ability to get high and fast in any airplane allows you to shoot missiles further, which obviously increases your offensive potential. So it's got a huge radar up front. So that thing is phenomenal. And the ability to put that airplane where you want it to go and be able to employ weapons before anybody else can, based on the capabilities in terms of altitude and speed, was great. And like I said, getting up there in the higher altitudes, it handles like a Cadillac. It's very smooth. But then when you want to turn and get into a dogfight, it's very, very maneuverable. And what I like about the Eagle a lot is that when you're fighting other airplanes, the F-15 buffets a lot. So as you increase the G and like kind of the buffet or the angle of attack increases in the airplane, you'll start feeling these like kind of shaking vibrations of the airplane,
Right.
and it'll increase intensity as you increase the angle of attack. And what's really nice about that airplane is that the way that airplane flies and designed, it's a pretty much it'll constantly increase. What's really nice when you're flying and fighting against other airplanes, it's kind of a visual arena, kind of that dogfighting kind of scenario. You can truly feel the airplane and how it's performing and how it's handling, and you just intuitively know, based on experience of flying that specific airplane, how you're doing and how it's responding to what you're asking of it. So I love the airplane. It's a great airplane, and they've continued. I mean, it's an older airplane. Obviously, it was some of the airplanes I flew in the F-15 were built in the 70s and 80s, and what they've done is they've continued to increase the software and hardware components of that airplane. So the airframe itself is structurally an older airplane, but in terms of the components, the hardware, the software, the weapons, they've continued to upgrade those. And I think it's still an incredibly formidable airplane against anything out there. It's obviously not stealthy. It doesn't have the performance the Raptor has. But I mean, I think the Eagle's still a phenomenal airplane and very relevant still.
Yeah, so do you have any memorable stories from flying the Eagle?
Yeah, actually,
I'm sure you got plenty, but maybe a couple.
yeah, I've got heaps of stories. But yeah, I think one of the really cool, like one of those memories, I think all of us have these things in our life where we experience something and that image gets burned in our brain, and we'll never forget that image, until we die. And one of the most memorable experiences I ever had in the Eagle was actually my third high aspect ride. So basically dogfighting ride where instead of having somebody start off offensive, start off defensive, you basically start off neutral. And that's how you begin the fight. So it's still a part test training kind of mission, but you're starting off neutral instead of having anybody have a specific advantage. And this is my third high aspect ride in the F-15 school. And at the time, my instructor pilot was the highest time F-15 pilot in the Air Force. So he had the
Wow.
most amount of hours, the most amount of experience of any other pilot in the Air Force. And I probably at the time had the least, if not close to the least amount of experience and hours in the F-15 in the Air Force. So we got there and fly, and it was one of those dusk sorties. So we're out there, and we get into a tree, which essentially means that we have, slowed the fight down dramatically. We're basically, if we look at it from the side perspective, we're basically doing this. We're fighting for advantage, like, positional cheer. The airplane's very slow. We're both in afterburner. So with the sun going down and You see his two afterburner, you see the flames come out the back
Wow.
end of his plane, and I'm just like, holy cow! I take a second to think about this. I'm like, I'm the youngest Eagle driver in the Air Force, and that is the oldest Eagle driver in the Air Force, and here we are fighting with two F-15s on an absolutely stunning night or evening. It was just incredible, and I got to learn so much from him. Um, and it was just, that was one of those images that'll never leave my brain.
Absolutely. So, how long did you spend on the Eagle?
I started in August of 2010, and then I left in May of 2014 or June of 2014.
So, how many hours did you get on the jet?
It was about 500 hours.
Not bad, not bad. But we're here to talk about the Raptor, obviously. What an incredible jet. But yeah, what were your first thoughts on the aircraft?
There's some funny, like, just I guess ergonomic things that are different. So the F-15 is a center stick, and the Raptor's a side stick. So it's funny because, like, when you're flying and your hands are on the controls, it's not a big deal. But when you're taxiing around, the most fighter jets have a little button on the stick that basically controls the nose wheel steering. So you push that, and it allows you to turn,
Yep.
sharper angles on the ground, taxi around. So if you're taxiing around, your hands are off the controls for the first, like, I'd probably say 10 to 20 sorties in the Raptor. Um, if I wasn't thinking about it, I would instinctually just grab for the center stick, and there's nothing there. Yeah, I was like, oh shoot, I gotta go over here.
Yeah.
But there's some funny, like, just ergonomic things like that about the F-22 that are different than the Eagle. Um, but I think the biggest things that I noticed about the F-22 is that just the performance is insane. Like, one, I guess the most visible thing to you is that it's a single piece canopy. So the F-15 has a canopy bow,
Yeah.
much like the F-35 or F-18. They have canopy bows. So there's something that's there in your sight line. In F-22, there's nothing. It's just one piece canopy, so you have unobstructed views all around, and that's gorgeous. Like, it's just an amazing office view. You can't really, like, people talk about their high rises and corner offices, and, like, this is the coolest office ever. Um, so that was cool to see. And then the performance is just it's amazing. How fast the jet accelerates, how fast it slows down, its turn performance, all those things are just really incredible. In the airplane, I've gone to very, very high altitudes, very high speeds, and the airplane just wants to keep going faster and higher. It's unreal. It's like a rocket ship.
And we'll get into a few details later on, but maybe you can share with our viewers what the role of the F-22 is with the USAF.
So the F-22 is primarily designed as an air-to-air fighter, and replaced the F-15C in that role, or took over for the F-15C in that role. So our job primarily is to go kill bad guy airplanes and basically control the airspace. So what that allows for, in two different ways. I think of, whether you're, I like to relate a lot of things to sports because I think it's very tangible, very easy to understand. And if you're on the football pitch and you have people that are playing forward, people playing defense, and they're playing different roles. Like, you have offense and defense roles there, and the F-22 does the same exact thing in air to air. So there are times we're playing defense where we're protecting something. It could be, a city. It could be the coastline. If you've ever seen articles of, Russian bombers flying near the coast of Alaska, we're protecting our coastline, we're protecting our airspace, and I've done that multiple times as well. So we're doing a defensive kind of posture in terms of what we're using the airplane for, but making sure that no bad guy airplanes get to good guy land, if that makes sense to oversimplify it. And then on the offensive side, we can have the ability to carry bombs as well, so we can escort ourselves into areas, drop weapons, hit targets, and escort ourselves back out. So we have the ability to do both of those. Yeah, we can carry a combination of different GPS-guided weapons. So we can use those, and obviously with F-22, it's a stealthy airplane, so we can get into places that other airplanes, physically can't, based off whether it's, surface air missiles, air-to-air, or anti-aircraft artillery, whatever it happens to be. We can get into a lot of places that other airplanes can't. So that's really unique. But then also the more traditional sense, if we think of, like Spitfires or Mustangs in World War II and what they were doing, escorting in bombers, et cetera, same kind of role. So our primary offensive mindset, our mission set for the F-22 would be escorting other people in. So whether they're other fighters, I've been deployed to the Middle East a couple times now, and I've flown missions with the RAF, the RAFF, RAAF, and then the French Air Force, flown with Marines, all sorts of branches and other countries as well. And we've primarily did a role of escorting them into certain areas. And in the Middle East, there are a lot of tensions, a lot of uncertainty, and who owns what and who's where. And whatnot. So having a Raptor there to have that information, because the F-22, I guess I would just equate it to a flying computer. There are sensors all around the airplane. They give you information in the cockpit in a very easy to understand kind of color coded display. So being able to get all that information from around the battle space and see it in a very clear picture in the cockpit and be able to make decisions for the overall force package is huge, and having that protective blanket, if you will, of F-22s in the sky is really nice, not only for other airplanes, but also people on the ground, and there were times where, there were Syrian fighters out there or whoever it happened to be, and having airplanes that are designed to keep them away from ground forces, coalition ground forces is really important. So that's kind of our traditional role in terms of air-to-air, both on the defensive and offensive side.
Mm-hmm. So, let's talk a bit about your ground training. How did it feel coming from the F-15? Because I'm guessing it was a quantum leap almost in technology-wise.
It definitely, changed a lot in terms of technology. So the F-15 and most fighters, the F-18, F-16, F-15, at least on the USAF or the U.S. side, most of those airplanes have sensors, whether it's a radar, defensive systems, whatever it is. They all have their own individual screen that provides information to you, and then you're taking that information and kind of running it through your brain and figuring out, okay, if I compile all this information, what is it telling me about everything that's happening around me? And that, it takes time, it takes experience to understand what's important, what's not important, at what time, and process all those things in a matter of seconds. So what was really nice about the F-22 is that it takes, all this information from different sensors and puts it on, one easy to understand display. So it's very intuitive in that way, which I liked a lot because it allows you to start thinking more about the greater context of how you fit in this puzzle of the
Mm-hmm.
conflict or the scenario, whether it's training or combat. So it kind of just frees up some brain space to think about, more things and stay ahead of a lot of things that are changing in a rapid fashion. So I like that a lot. And in terms of the transition, having flown the F-15 for about 500 hours or so, I'd already flown I would argue, a very, very high performance fighter. The F-15 is phenomenal. So it wasn't as much of a shock to me as I would say the brand new pilots who come right out of pilot training, and they come out of pilot's course and they go from T-38 to an F-22. That is like you alluded to. That's a quantum leap. You're talking about a massive change in capabilities and all these things. But I had already, flown the F-15 for about 4 years and had done a bunch of training, a bunch of other, things in the F-15. So when I took that experience and transferred over to F-22, and I think that made the transition much easier than, like I said, going straight from pilot's course to F-22s.
Yeah, because I guess the new guys coming in is like the T-38 straight to almost like a spaceship. It must be like crazy for them guys.
Yeah.
Obviously it's been being a single seat aircraft. Was the simulator a big thing for you guys?
It is. And I think the simulator is a great resource. There are limitations in the simulator. Obviously, with a very maneuverable fighter like an F-22, it's not going to, be a full motion simulator. You're not going to be flipping around and doing all those things. I think just the hydraulics and actuators, all those things would be insanely expensive. But I think it's really great for habituating things, whether, emergency procedure training, whether it's certain tactics or just the hands on throttle and stick, the HOTAS and the buttons we work to manipulate screens and displays. I think, it's going back to sports. There are people that, talk about sports and say, I'm not going to practice till I can get it right. I'm going to practice till I can't get it wrong. And I think that's what the simulator's for. I'm going to keep practicing in the simulator till my hands, my brain, what I see in the displays, it's just an extension of what I want to use the airplane for. And that's the way I look at it. If I want to go fly airplanes for fun, I would probably take a backcountry airplane, flying through the mountains and landing on some grass strip somewhere, and go hunting or fishing. That to me is a blast.
Mm-hmm.
But I use the F-22 as a weapon, and that's, obviously in the air show it's a little different, but in my mind, fighter aircraft are weapons, and I want to be able to get to a level of proficiency that I'm using that airplane as an extension of myself. I'm using it to further whatever objectives we're going after that day. I think that's what the simulator is really good for, is it habituates those patterns. So when it is, miserably hot, miserably cold, it's dark, it's whatever it is, your systems start breaking in the airplane. You can sort through all that and still be able to get your job done in the airplane because you've just gone through it so many times that it becomes second nature to you. And I think that's what the simulator that's what really shines, I think.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about your first flight. What was it like kicking in them reheats or afterburners for the first time? That must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. there's no drag on the airplane. There's very little drag. It's just all just induced drag from the airplane itself. But there's nothing hanging on the wing, so the airplane you fly is the airplane you're fly to combat. And the F-15 we would fly with pylons for weapons. We would fly external gas tanks, all those things. And that all is going to increase the parasitic drag on the airplane, which slows it down. Obviously, and acceleration slows down, all those things. The F-22, I mean, it produces more thrust than it weighs. Even with a full combat load of gas and weapons, it still produces more thrust than it weighs.
Wow.
Yeah. So taking off an afterburner for the first time, you're just like, this is happening really fast, and it's awesome.
Yeah, so how did it compare to the F-15? Was there a massive difference?
I think if you take all the things, all the external components of the F-15 off the
Yeah, if
airplane,
you were clean, yeah.
if you were clean, I think it'd be somewhat comparable. I think the F-22 would still have an advantage, but I think it'd be somewhat comparable. But then you start putting it into a combat configuration. That's one thing that I think people don't realize, when they watch videos of air shows. That's one thing we talk about a lot, because you watch airplanes from other countries and they're doing some amazing cool backflips and cartwheels and all this stuff, and you're like, that's cool, but you are completely cleaned off. You have nothing on the airplane, and you're taking off with less fuel weight, so you're reducing your gross weight, which then increase your performance. So they're doing all these things to make the air show airplane look really cool, and that's awesome. What I like to highlight, though, is the F-22 is like we don't change the airplane. I don't even own my own airplanes. I borrow airplanes from the squadrons for the shows, and whatever jet's available that weekend is the jet I'm taking for the air show. So we truly take a combat ready airplane and don't modify it. Obviously, we're not going to fly with bombs or missiles or any of that stuff, but we don't change the fuel weight. We don't do anything to the airplane structurally to decrease weight. We just fly a normal combat airplane at displays, and what you're seeing is a ready to go airplane, which is awesome.
So yeah, can you talk us through your flying training and the stages you go through? Because obviously it's a single seat. Like, how does that work for the F-22?
The F-22 training for the student pilots is a lot more robust in terms of simulators and flying. They do a lot more of that since they don't have a two-seat version. And for me, when I switched over, I think I did a total of like 11 flights. I think it was like 12 sims and 11 flights in F-22 before I was like out of the course and off to the squadron, just based on my previous experience. And but the brand new pilots will get significantly more time in the simulators before flying. They'll also, it's kind of like a crawl, walk, run approach, where they will go to the simulators, do academics, all those things. They'll go out to the airplane, they'll start it up for the first time. They'll understand how to start it up, shut it down, so they hear all the sounds and the creaks and the noises and the systems, and they see all that stuff. They kind of get that sensory piece of it, and then they'll shut it down, come back inside, talk about all the things that they did and whatever else, and then they'll go fly it. And when they fly it for the first time, they're flying with an instructor pilot in another airplane. So we'll be, they'll be flying their airplane. The instructor pilot or IP will be in the other airplane. They'll fly out there, and they'll kind of guide them through that whole process. So that's how we kind of get around the single seat only piece of the F-22, and the F-35 is much similar, or very similar to that.
So how did you get used to the cockpit and this new radar? Like I said before, it was a quantum leap. Was it like a massive quantum leap in terms of cockpit space?
The F-15 cockpit's actually a little bit bigger than the F-22 cockpit.
Okay.
So it is a little bit bigger, but at the same time, it's the F-22 cockpit's very comfortable. I haven't really found a time where I'm like, man, this is cramped. It's so nice, especially on the long missions. I've flown close to 12 hours, in F-22, and it doesn't matter what airplane you fly in, it's gonna be uncomfortable at the 12-hour mark. So, but there's plenty of space. I'd have little pockets to put snacks and water.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And that, so yeah.
So yeah, Cabo, what is the loadout capability of the jet? Like, what would you carry on a full load?
So if we're doing an air-to-air mission, we would carry 6 long-range radar missiles, and we'd carry 2 heat-seeking missiles, and we'd have the gun as well. And then if we're going to carry, bombs, we can kind of mix up we basically are trading off some of the long-range radar missiles for the bomb stations to either put, the larger GPS weapons, or we carry small diameter bombs as well, which are about 250 pounds, and they have little fins on top. So you actually kick them out of the belly of the airplane. They open the fins up and glide to the target. So we can kind of vary that up quite a bit. But we're typically always going to carry those heat-seeking missiles, and then the gun, obviously, and then the internal portion of like the main weapons bays are going to vary based on mission set. But for an air-to-air, it's going to be six AMRAAMs, so like the long-range radar missiles.
Yeah, so like my ignorance here, I never knew the F-22 carried air to ground ordnance. When did this
Oh, no
come in?
worries.
Was it all the way from the start, or is this a new thing?
It was not initially designed with air-to-ground weapons, and then over time they basically added that to increase the flexibility of what the airplane can do. And that primarily is, driven through the fact that we can get to places other airplanes can't. The F-35 has obviously come out, the last couple of years, and it can do a lot of similar things. But it's primarily designed as an air-to-ground platform, not as much of an air-to-air platform.
Hmm.
But until that airplane came out, there was really nothing that could get into areas undetected and then deliver weapons to target. So that was one of those, at least fighter aircraft. Obviously, we have the B-2 and we have other airplanes like that. But for fighter aircraft, there really wasn't anything out there. So they added that just to increase the mission sets and what we're capable of doing for those reasons.
So did you get the chance to fire live weapons or drop live bombs, even in practice?
Yeah, I've dropped live weapons in practice and in combat. I've shot missiles in practice as well. We have not there hasn't been much air-to-air combat in terms of actually shooting airplanes down in quite a while. Which people look at that and I kind of see it as a double-edged sword. It's like it's like being a footballer and being on the bench your entire career, right? You're like,
Yeah,
man, I want
I want to get
play.
out there.
Yeah, so there's that element of it, but it's also like I kind of temper that with I understand like the reason we exist is to de-escalate things and to not get to the point where we're actually using these airplanes for their intended purpose, and if I'm using a Raptor to go kill airplanes, things have probably gone awry somewhere in terms of like the diplomacy piece, the whatever leverage we can use with international politics and whatnot. Like things have gone awry, and I'm using this airplane as a weapon now, and to use a $160 million airplane as a weapon it's kind of it's a pretty big statement,
Absolutely.
So in terms of air to air. So in that regard, like it's double-edged sword. I'm thankful that obviously we were able to use this airplane to avoid conflicts, and you'd be surprised, in terms of just foreign policy, putting F-22s or squadron F-22s somewhere strategic has implications that hopefully de-escalate scenarios, and that's huge, right? If we can avoid
Absolutely.
conflict, that's all the better. But without a doubt, like this airplane, I have no problem taking this airplane in the skies against anything out there, no matter what country it's from, no matter what generation it is. Like I'm very confident in the Raptor because the airplane is awesome.
So let's get into the strengths and weaknesses of the aircraft.
Yeah, so the strengths, I mean, the strengths, the sensors are incredible. And like I said, it's not just it's the whole airplane has sensors all around it, and it feeds into the cockpit, which is great. So that's really nice. Like I said, the ability for it to get higher and faster than anything else we own is really nice because just like, if I were to take a baseball and, throw it from a standstill versus driving 80 miles an hour in a car and then throwing it,
Yeah,
like it's going to go further, right? So if
of course.
I get higher and faster, I'm going to shoot missiles further. I'm going to drop bombs further. So that, those weapons combined with a platform of the F-22 that can go higher and faster than anything else out there is great. So I love that about it. The flight controls are incredible. As you've seen, in terms of air show videos and whatnot, the airplane does backflips. It's awesome. So it can really do whatever I ask it to do, which is awesome. So the maneuverability, the capability of it, and the sensors are really amazing. And then when you add stealth to that, it's I'll go to school visits and talk to kids about airplanes, and you try to put it in the most simplistic terms as you can because you want them to understand. And you're like, hey, imagine being like a ninja running around in the dark, throwing stars at people and just picking people off, like
That's
and
brilliant.
they have no idea you're there. You
Yeah,
have no idea you're there. Like you're playing 95% offense and about 5% defense, and that's what an F-22 is. And if it's employed properly, that's what it is, and that's a huge strength of the F-22 when you add the stealth component to the other things we already discussed. In terms of weaknesses, I think it's probably a common weakness for every fighter jet out there. We always wish we had more. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a big airplane, but when an F-22 is pointing at you, unless you know where to look, it's very difficult to see. It's very on the ground with the doors open, it looks pretty wide, but once it's in the air with gear up, it's very, very flat, and it's hard to see if it's pointing at you. So I think the biggest thing that all fighter pilots would probably ask for is I want more gas, I want more weapons, I want more, all the things that allow you to do more stuff. That's always a thing we ask for, and they're working hard to fix those problems or try to make it better. But those are things I'd probably say, in terms of improvements or things that I wish we could do better. Is just like, yeah, I want more gas, I want more weapons, I want better weapons. Those are things that every fighter pilot I think would universally say.
Yeah, but the difference is most the guys I talk to is more. I want more thrust, but you've got the most thrust in the world, so like you can't complain on that sense.
I mean, I'll always say I'll take more
Ah,
for sure.
yeah.
But yeah, it's the engines are great.
So yeah, on a side note here, like, how did you get used to coming from a center stick to a side stick? Was it like, did it feel natural?
It took a couple flights, like I mentioned. There were a couple times where I'd like grab for the center stick and it wasn't there. But beyond that, I mean, it's very intuitive. I almost feel like you're sitting in a reclining chair where you're just sitting there. There's a little elbow rest as well that kind of swivels out. So if you want to
Okay.
use that, rest your elbow on it, and your hands right there, and you're basically just manipulating the controls and the weapons and sensors and displays all from your fingertips, and that's really nice. So it's very intuitive to operate, which is nice.
And yeah, I'm going to talk about DACT. We talked about it earlier, but you're going to have to tell me how it fared against the F-15, the F-18, even Typhoon. How did it fare?
Yeah, I think, and that really is going to depend on what sphere we're talking about. So if we're talking about beyond visual range, where you're like very far away from other people, then the F-22 is just incredible. Like it just does amazing work. But when we get into within visual range, the the F-22 is a very remarkable airplane. And when you get into that within visual range, if employed properly, I think it's the best airplane out there. But it's still, it's like everything else in life. If I take a brand new F-22 pilot, an F-22, and I put him against, a very, very seasoned or experienced Typhoon pilot or a fall pilot, an F-15 pilot, pick an airplane out there. If somebody knows how to employ their airplane incredibly effectively, and I give them a brand new F-22 pilot and F-22, you have the most amazing airplane in the world, but if you don't have the experience or background to support that or
Yeah.
understand how that airplane works to its fullest and truest potential, then that airplane's going to lose. Simple as that. So that's why we spend a lot of time training and getting our young guys experience, because we're trying to build that experience they can use this airplane for what it was designed to do. So I guess that's not a black and white concrete answer for you, but I would say that beyond visual range, the airplane makes up for a ton, and even within visual range, it makes up for a ton of errors, mistakes, of inexperience, etc. But at some point, there is still a breaking point of it's not like there's no button that you're like, hey, magic button,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, Raptor wins. So the experience level in a very capable fighter like a Typhoon or a Fall or Eagle, those airplanes are going to do really well with a very experienced pilot and a very inexperienced Raptor pilot.
So it's almost like you're fighting the pilot in a way.
For sure. When I look at this, I guess a different way to think about it or describe it is, when I look at the F-15, in order to pick the best F-15 pilot in the squadron and the worst F-15 pilot in the squadron, that the difference between those two is massive. Like the spread for those two is
Yeah.
huge. Whereas in the F-22, I'd say the difference between the best and worst pilot in the squadron is much more narrow, because the airplane makes up for a lot. So you can do a lot of things and make up for a lot of mistakes, or exploit a lot of things in the F-22 without having that experience. So the pilot component is reduced in F-22 because you have an amazing platform to start
Yeah.
with. Whereas you need to have that experience. You need to understand the airplane works really well to fly an F-15 really well, or a Typhoon, or a Rafale, or pick an airplane. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about thrust vectoring because it's amazing. Well, we'll get onto the airshow part later on, but what's it like to have? And is it like automatic, or is there a switch where you can take it off?
It's all automatic, and it's all run through the flight control system. So when I fly the airplane, you're familiar with fly-by-wire, I'm basically pulling back on the stick and saying I want to go up, or push forward and go down, or roll left or right, and I'm basically just asking the airplane, this is what I want to do, and that's going to figure out what combination of flight controls it's going to give me to create the effect I'm asking for, and that effect could come, as a combination of flight controls. It could come as a combination of the thrust vectoring. It really depends on my airspeed, my altitude, my angle of attack, my side slip. All those things go into what combination of flight controls I'm going to get, and that's just part of the whole, the holistic system of flight controls.
Yeah, and earlier you mentioned, yeah, you've flown with, many air forces, but can you maybe share a few stories of like flying on large exercises like Red Flag, if you have flown it, or Maple Flag?
Yeah. So in those scenarios, we primarily just do our air-to-air mission, which is escorting people in or defending areas. And what's really nice about that is, like I said, the F-22 or the F-15 for that matter can get very high altitudes, and we hang out there. So when you start putting 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 airplanes in the same piece of sky, it
Yeah.
gets very complex, right? And there are a lot of things that are happening. So the ability for you to be up in the 40s and 50,000 foot block, and everybody's below you, is really comforting.
Yeah,
Especially at
yeah.
nighttime when you see their anti-collision lights blinking, and you're like, you see all these airplanes crisscrossing below you. You're like, that looks dangerous down there. Oh, I'm gonna hang out up here.
I'm
So
staying here.
yeah, so that's really nice. And with the sensors, you do have an amazing picture of what's happening out in front of you. So you just have a lot more information. I remember the first time I flew in a large force exercise, the F-15, you know, is like you jump in, you're like, holy cow, there's a lot of stuff, and you're overwhelmed easily with all the information that's happening, what's happening with the communications and the radios, all those things. The F-22, I think it kind of it tones that down a little bit because you have a lot more information, and it allows you to process things a little bit better and faster.
So yeah, I want to talk a bit about flying in Alaska. What's it like flying there and also living there? It must be like quite strange coming from the US and then you go into this. Well, I know it's the US, but like this frozen plane almost.
Flying and living in Alaska is the best ever. Like
Oh, really?
I would live there forever. Honestly, it's
Wow.
incredible. So yeah, I guess I've not been, so I'm just making a anecdotal comparison between the two. But I would imagine it's probably like living in Oslo or somewhere in Scandinavia. It's you have these amazing glaciers and fjords, and you have this amazing,
Yeah.
very dramatic landscape. Flying through there is incredible. And in the summertime, it's really nice. I've a buddy of mine, I've a couple friends of mine that went to, they were in the Norwegian Air Force that went back and are flying F-16s there, and
Cool.
we chat every once in a while, and they'll send a picture like summertime. I'm like, man, it looks like Alaska. It's awesome. Uh, and so and I'm an outdoorsy person, so I love the hiking, the hunting, the camping, the fishing. I love all those things. So Alaska is like the ultimate playground for those things. And like I said, flying there when actually somebody asked me a question recently about, do you feel like a king when you're flying F-22, in the skies? I'm like, actually, it's the complete opposite. I feel, I almost, you get a sense of how small we are and how small
Yeah.
our piece of the puzzle is in the world. So it gives you a lot of perspective. And when you're flying around these epic landscapes and you see these mountains and you're like, you see animals and you see all this stuff, and you're like, holy cow, all the things that we worry about and the stressors in our lives and all those things like are so insignificant, in the greater context. So I really love that aspect of flying up there because it just gives you a sense of freedom. It gives you a sense of perspective that I don't, I haven't gotten in other places. Um, there's just this vastness about it that just, I don't know, it's a very introspective kind of feeling, and I love it. It's great.
Is it still F-15s there as well, as all? Is it exclusive F-22s now?
Just F-22s now. Yep.
Oh, nice one.
So there
But
used to be an F-15C squadron. There used to be an F-15E strike eagle squadron there, and the F-15E squadron is now an F-22 squadron, and then the F-15 squadron is now an F-22 squadron as well.